For most of America's early history, work followed the sun and the seasons. Then a new rhythm arrived. Machines that didn't get tired, and owners who measured days in output. In a single generation, the United States began shifting from farms to factories. This wasn't only about inventions, it was about incentives, networks, and rules that made machines spread. The Industrial Revolution is a story of how a whole system learns to move faster. On a farm, time was flexible. Plant, wait, harvest, repair, repeat. Bad weather delayed everything, and neighbors helped when needed, but that flexibility also meant limits. Production grew slowly. Industrial work would replace seasonal time with clock time, turning minutes into money. The biggest change wasn't the machine, it was the schedule. Early factories needed energy, and rivers provided it for free. A spinning wheel powered by a water wheel could outwork dozens of hands. That made rivers into profit magnets. Whoever built near moving water gained an advantage. Energy is the first input of industry. Where energy flows, factories follow. America's first mills were not giant steel cities. They were compact workshops scaling up one task. Their success depended on a steady workforce that could show up every day. Wages pulled people off farms, especially young adults looking for cash. This was the beginning of a new bargain. Trade independence for a paycheck. If every object is handmade, every repair is unique and slow. Interchangeable parts changed that. One standard piece could fit many products. This idea spread through armories and workshops, turning craft into a repeatable process. Standardization is a superpower because it lets factories scale. It also trains workers into routines machines can amplify. In many homes, families spun thread, sewed clothes, and made tools as part of daily survival. Workshops gathered those tasks under one roof, adding supervision and specialization. For young people, leaving home for wage work could mean independence or risk. The system was shifting where value was created, from kitchen tables to factory floors, and once value moves, power follows. Even when goods were produced, getting them to buyers was hard. Dirt roads turned into mud, rivers froze, and wagons broke. Slow transport kept markets local and small. Industry needed a way to move inputs and products reliably. Without networks, factories are islands. Factories cost money before they make money. Buildings, machines, raw materials, and wages. Credit turns future profits into present power. Banks and investors began to decide which towns grew and which stayed quiet. When credit expands, industry accelerates. When it shrinks, everything stalls. By 1820, the ingredients were in place. River power, a growing labor pool, and investment. What was missing was scale and connection. But systems don't leap. They compound. Small gains attract more money, more workers, and better machines. That feedback loop is the engine of industrialization. Once the loop starts, stopping it becomes costly. The Industrial Revolution in America began when production moved from flexible household rhythms to measured, repeatable routines. Rivers powered early machines, investors supplied capital, and wages pulled workers into new spaces. The old world didn't vanish, but the new world gained momentum. From here, mills would become towns, and towns would become cities. The clock had arrived, and it was loud. Lowell-style mills concentrated machines, dorms, and management in one planned system. Water powered the looms, and rules powered the workforce. Young women came for wages, education, and independence, but their days were long and controlled. The factory didn't just make cloth, it made a new kind of life. Efficiency is a culture, not just a tool. Textile mills needed cotton, and cotton came through vast trade networks. When a factory depends on distant raw materials, it begins to care about ports, shipping, and global prices. Industry turns geography into a supply chain, and supply chains turn faraway events into local stress. America's factories were plugging into the world. A single mill could produce cloth at a pace that shocked hand spinners and weavers. That abundance lowered prices and expanded demand, which pulled in more investment. But it also raised expectations. Owners demanded steady output, and workers faced steady pressure. In a factory system, A small delay becomes everyone's problem. Speed creates fragility. Factories needed punctuality the way farms needed rain. Bells and boarding house rules kept workers aligned with the machine's pace. Some workers liked the structure. Others felt caged by it. This is the trade-off industrialization often demands: predictability in exchange for autonomy. The system was training people to live by clocks. When conditions felt unfair, workers began organizing in new ways: meetings, petitions, and public appeals. These weren't giant unions yet. They were early experiments in collective voice. Industrial systems create concentrated workplaces, and concentrated workplaces make coordination easier. Once people learn they can coordinate, they rarely forget. Even a quiet petition changes the balance. Interchangeable parts and specialized machinery spread beyond textiles into tools, clocks, and weapons. The trick was repeatability. Once a process is standardized, you can train many workers quickly. That turns skill into a system asset instead of an individual asset. It also lowers costs, encouraging more factories. Standardization was industrialization's secret language. Before railroads dominated, canals were the superhighways of heavy goods. Digging a canal was expensive, but it could cut costs dramatically and connect inland farms to coastal markets. Infrastructure pays off when it changes incentives for everyone who uses it. That's why canals attracted both public support and private profit. Water carried the Industrial Revolution forward. Where factories gathered, housing, shops, and services followed. A mill town could turn into a small city simply by adding more jobs. Growth attracts more people, and more people create more demand, another feedback loop. But fast growth also strains sanitation, housing, and governance. Industrialization builds wealth and problems together. Inventions didn't appear alone. They spread through apprentices, merchants, and copied designs. A successful machine in one town became the blueprint for another. Innovation is contagious when profits prove it works, and as more factories appear, more tinkerers have reasons to improve them. The system begins producing inventions as a byproduct. By the 1840s, America had proven a new model: concentrated production powered by water, organized labor, and investment. Textile towns showed how machines could reshape family life, gender roles, and community rules. Canals and credit widened the market, making factories more profitable, and therefore more common. The system was ready for its next accelerant: steam and rails. Once that arrived, distance itself would shrink. Water power tied factories to rivers. Steam loosened that chain. With boilers and engines, factories could move closer to cities, ports, and coal supplies. That changed geography. Now the best factory location was wherever the market and labor were. Energy choice reshaped the whole map of industry. Steam needed fuel, and coal became that fuel. Mines, rail lines, and ports formed a new supply chain that could make or break production. When coal shipments slowed, factories slowed. Energy systems create dependencies, and dependencies create power centers. Coal towns became crucial nodes in the industrial network. Railroads transformed the cost of moving goods and people. They made inland resources profitable and coastal customers reachable. Investors poured money into tracks because tracks created new markets, and new markets created more profit. Rails didn't just follow growth, they caused it. America's economy started behaving like one connected machine. The telegraph changed competition by changing time. Prices, orders, and news could travel almost instantly along wires. That allowed businesses to coordinate over long distances and respond to shortages quickly. It also created new pressure. When information is fast, expectations are fast. A faster nervous system makes a faster economy. As cities grew, small workshops either scaled up or got outcompeted. Factories concentrated machines and specialized jobs, letting owners reduce costs. Workers gained wages, but lost control over pace and methods. In a factory, the process matters more than the person. That's efficient and emotionally hard. Industrial wages pulled people from farms into towns and cities. Some left because farming was tough. Others left because factories promised cash and choice. Migration isn't only movement, it's a labor reallocation that changes politics, culture, and family structure. When millions relocate, the country's center of gravity moves. America's center began moving toward smokestacks. Inventors needed protection and funding, and patents helped promise rewards. Exhibitions and fairs spread new machines to wider audiences. But copying also spread ideas faster than any law could stop. The result was a competitive churn. Improve, sell, adapt, repeat. Innovation became an ecosystem, not a lone genius story. War can be a terrible accelerator. The Civil War increased demand for uniforms, weapons, rails, and logistics. Meeting that demand pushed factories toward larger scale and tighter coordination. After the war, the machinery and organizational habits remained. Industrial capacity became part of national power. As rail networks expanded, coordination problems appeared. Different track gauges and local times caused confusion. Standardization solved this by forcing many actors to share rules. That's a systems lesson. Networks need common standards to scale safely. America's industry wasn't only making goods, it was making protocols. Protocols are invisible infrastructure. By the 1860s, steam, rails, and telegraph wires had collapsed distance. Markets that once behaved separately now reacted together. Capital flowed faster, labor moved faster, and decisions had bigger ripple effects. A connected economy grows quickly, but it can also spread shocks quickly. The stage was set for explosive post-war industrial expansion. After 1865, investment poured into factories, rail lines, and cities. The logic was simple. Faster production plus bigger markets meant bigger profits. But rapid building also meant rapid change. Laws, neighborhoods, and expectations struggled to keep up. When an economy accelerates, governance must accelerate too. Otherwise, pressure escapes in dangerous ways. Millions of immigrants arrived seeking opportunity, safety, or both. Cities absorbed them because cities had jobs. Factory owners welcomed cheap labor. Workers competed for wages. Neighborhoods formed quickly. Immigration was not just a story of people, it was a labor supply shock that changed bargaining power. It also changed America's culture, street by street. When a city grows faster than housing, families squeeze into smaller spaces. Tenements were close to jobs but often unhealthy and overcrowded. Reformers began documenting conditions, turning private suffering into public pressure. Industrialization doesn't only build factories, it builds living systems around them, and those systems can fail. Factories required coordination. Machines must run, materials must arrive, and workers must match the pace. Managers used rules, fines, and supervision to reduce randomness. From a systems view, the goal was to turn humans into predictable inputs. That created productivity and resentment. Industrialization changed women's economic roles. Some earned wages in textiles and garment work. Others took in piecework at home under factory contracts. Wages could expand choices, but low pay and long hours narrowed them again. The key shift was bargaining. Household work was invisible to markets, but wage work was measurable. Measurable work becomes political. Many families needed every paycheck, and some factories hired children for small, repetitive tasks. We show this carefully: supervised, no danger focus, and no graphic exploitation. Reformers argued that childhood should not be consumed by production. Employers argued about costs and competition. This is a systems conflict. Poverty pulls children in, policy pushes them out. Industrial cities needed infrastructure: clean water, waste removal, fire services, and safer streets. These are public goods, expensive but essential. When cities built them, productivity rose and disease fell. The Industrial Revolution wasn't only private factories, it was public systems catching up. Modern urban life is engineered. Fast growth often rides on borrowed money. When confidence is high, credit expands and construction surges. When confidence breaks, layoffs spread and families suffer first. A connected industrial economy spreads booms and panics like weather systems. Factories and railroads required coordination beyond the shop floor. Clerks tracked inventory, managers tracked output, and accountants tracked profit. A new layer of white-collar work grew because complex systems need control rooms. This changed class structure, not just owners and workers, but supervisors, specialists, and administrators. The economy became more layered and more tense. By 1880, America's center of life was shifting towards cities and industrial jobs. Immigration and migration supplied labor, rail networks supplied markets, and urban infrastructure tried to keep people alive and moving. But the same forces that created wealth also created crowded housing, dangerous incentives, and social friction. The industrial city was powerful, yet unstable. That instability would ignite the next act. When thousands work under one roof, grievances become shared. Wages, hours, safety, and dignity all become negotiable and contested. The same concentration that makes production efficient also makes protest possible. Workers can stop the machine by coordinating. Owners can replace workers by hiring from a large labor pool. Tension is built into the structure. A strike is a collective decision to withhold the input the factory needs most: labor. Owners call it disruption. Workers call it negotiation. Either way, it's a test of endurance, savings, and solidarity. In industrial systems, a paused machine can lose money fast. That makes strikes powerful and risky. When rail networks became central, a stoppage on rails could ripple nationwide. A local dispute could become a national shock. Investors and governments feared instability, while workers saw a chance to be heard. This is the double edge of connectivity. It spreads wealth and spreads conflict. The same rails that move goods can move pressure. In some places, companies controlled housing, stores, and wages. That reduced uncertainty for owners, but trapped workers in a closed loop. If you complain, you risk not only your job but your home. Company towns are a systems design choice. Maximize control, minimize exits, and fewer exits increase tension. Industrial speed can turn small mistakes into disasters. We don't show injury, we show missing guardrails, smoke, and near misses that reveal risk. Reformers argued for safety rules, owners worried about costs and downtime. Safety is often treated as optional until a crisis makes it mandatory. The system learns through pain. Unions grew by building infrastructure of their own: meeting halls, strike funds, and communication networks. Newspapers and leaflets spread arguments and coordinated actions without needing modern technology. Mutual aid helped workers survive long disputes. Organization is how individuals become a negotiating actor. It is also how movements outlast fear. Industrial conflict forced a political question: whose order matters? Owners demanded protection for property and production. Workers demanded protection for rights and lives. Governments often chose stability first, then reform later. That pattern shaped public trust. When people believe rules serve only the powerful, legitimacy cracks. Reformers pushed for schooling and minimum ages, arguing that a modern nation needed educated citizens. Families worried about losing income because poverty doesn't disappear on command. Reform works best when it changes incentives: compulsory education plus support plus enforcement. This is policy trying to reshape a labor market. Workers cared about real wages, what pay could actually buy. Owners and financiers cared about costs, competition, and profit. When prices rise or jobs vanish, both sides feel threatened. Trust becomes scarce, and scarce trust makes compromise hard. Industrial society had to invent new ways to share risk. By the late 1800s, labor conflict was no longer isolated. It was national. Rail strikes, factory disputes, and reform debates shaping elections and laws. The industrial machine had created a new political actor, organized labor, and a new public demand for safety and fairness. That pressure would collide with something else growing even faster: big business consolidation. The next story is about scale, of companies, money, and power. Steel made taller bridges, stronger rails, and larger machines possible. It lowered costs and increased scale, which rewarded the biggest producers. In industry, materials are destiny. Cheap steel expands what you can build. That's why steel mills became symbols of modern power. The nation's muscles were forged in heat and coordination. Oil turned into light, lubrication, and later fuel. An energy revolution inside the Industrial Revolution. Once a resource becomes essential, controlling it becomes a strategy. Pipelines, refineries, and distribution networks created winners with enormous leverage. Energy systems concentrate power because everyone depends on them, and dependence invites consolidation. Large firms could cut prices, outlast rivals, and buy competitors. That is how competition sometimes produces less competition. Trusts promised efficiency and stability, but they also threatened democracy by concentrating power. When one company controls the pipeline, it can set the terms for everyone else. The system began trading many small players for a few giants. As companies grew, they needed more capital than local banks could provide. National finance markets connected distant investors to factories and railroads. This accelerated expansion, but also increased vulnerability to panics. When capital flows like a river, it can flood. The financial system became an engine and a hazard. Some industrial giants tried to control every step: raw materials, transport, production, and sales. That reduced uncertainty and squeezed rivals who relied on the open market. Integration is a risk management strategy disguised as growth. It makes profits steadier and competition harder. The pipeline became a fortress. As production scaled, companies needed customers at scale. Advertising expanded through posters, catalogs, and storefront displays. We keep it text-free, icons, colors, and symbols that attract attention. The new economy wasn't only about making more, it was about persuading more. Demand became something you could manufacture. Industrialization didn't leave farms untouched. It pulled them into national price systems. Farmers bought manufactured goods and sold crops into markets they didn't control. Rail rates and loans could decide whether a year ended in profit or foreclosure. When markets expand, small producers can feel powerless. That's why political movements grew in rural America too. New machines rewarded scale. Bigger factories could justify expensive equipment and train specialized teams. That made growth self-reinforcing. Success paid for more success. Workers gained jobs but faced greater centralization and stricter routines. The system's question became, how big can we get before something breaks? In the late 1800s, America tested that limit. As power concentrated, Americans argued about fairness and freedom. If a monopoly can set prices and crush rivals, is the market still free? Reformers and politicians began designing new rules: antitrust, regulation, and oversight. This is the recurring pattern. Systems expand, then societies build guardrails. The question is how fast the guardrails arrive. By 1900, America had enormous industrial output and enormous corporate power. Steel, oil, and rail networks stitched the nation into a single market, while finance accelerated growth like an engine at full throttle. But concentration created fragility, shocks spread quickly, and power imbalances provoked resistance. The industrial system had reached a new scale. Now it would reshape daily life, from light bulbs to shopping, and force new reforms. Electric power changed the day by expanding it. Factories could run longer with steadier light, and streets became safer after dark. Electricity also enabled new machines and new industries. When energy becomes cleaner and more controllable, productivity rises again. The system found a new fuel: electrons. Long before the most famous assembly lines, factories were already breaking products into steps. Specialization makes workers faster at one task, and the whole line becomes predictable. That predictability lowers costs and widens markets, but it can also make work feel repetitive and replaceable. Railroads needed schedules, and schedules needed shared time. Local noon was too messy for a network economy. Standard time zones solved coordination and reduced accidents. This is a core industrial lesson. Networks force standards, and standards quietly change how people experience reality. Mass production created more goods than ever, and new retail spaces sold them as experiences. Department stores turned shopping into a city ritual. Prices fell for some items, widening access, but consumption also became a social signal. Industry wasn't only changing work, it was changing desire. The factory's output reprogrammed everyday life. Catalogs and rail delivery connected rural families to industrial goods. A farm could order tools, clothing, and household items that once required a long trip. This reduced rural isolation and tied farmers deeper into national markets. The system was now bidirectional. Farms fed cities, and factories fed farms. Networks made the country feel smaller. Industrial society needed literacy, math, and technical skills. Schools and vocational programs expanded because an educated workforce raises productivity. Reformers also argued that education could replace child labor by changing incentives. A modern economy is partly a classroom project. Knowledge became infrastructure. New building materials and engineering allowed larger buildings and denser downtowns. Streetcars and elevated trains moved crowds quickly, turning commuting into a daily pattern. When transit changes, housing patterns change. The city becomes a machine for moving people to work, and people's lives reorganize around that machine. As cities learned from disasters and disease, they adopted building codes, sanitation rules, and safety inspections. These rules rarely look heroic, but they save more lives than many dramatic inventions. Industrial growth forced society to professionalize governance. In systems terms, regulation is feedback, society correcting the market's blind spots. Industrial wealth concentrated in spectacular ways, while many workers lived close to the edge. Inequality isn't just numbers, it's geography. Who lives where, who breathes what air, who has savings. High inequality can destabilize a system by reducing trust and increasing conflict. This fueled reform movements and political battles. The industrial boom created winners and new demands for fairness. By 1900, industrialization had escaped the factory and entered daily life. Electric lights, mass retail, standardized time, and faster transit. The U.S. was becoming a modern network society, connected, productive, and increasingly dependent on infrastructure and rules. But the same system still carried tension: inequality, labor conflict, and environmental strain. The final act asks the hardest question: what does this machine leave behind? Factories produced more than goods. They produced smoke, waste, and crowded landscapes. Rivers that powered mills also carried pollution downstream. At first, many accepted this as the price of progress. But as cities grew, the costs became harder to ignore. Environmental consequences are system outputs too. The progressive era was a response to industrial scale, food safety, workplace standards, antitrust actions, and city reforms. These weren't anti-industry. They were attempts to make the system survivable. When a machine grows, you either add guardrails or accept crashes. Reform is society learning. The rulebook slowly thickened. Over decades, labor movements pushed for safer conditions, limits on hours, and recognition of collective bargaining. Gains were uneven and often hard-won, but they changed the baseline. This is a systems correction. When workers gain voice, conflict can move from streets to negotiation tables. The economy becomes more stable when rules are clearer. Industrialization lowered the cost of many goods and expanded access to tools, clothing, and light. It also created new jobs, new skills, and new dreams. For many families, the machine age meant improved comfort over time. Progress is real, even when it's messy. The question is how evenly it spreads. A connected economy spreads good news and bad news quickly. Panics and recessions could travel from finance to factories to households in weeks. Workers with no savings felt the shock first. This is the network effect. Connectivity increases efficiency, but also contagion. Modern economies need buffers. As production surged, Made in America became a national identity marker. Factories symbolized progress, power, and modernity. But identity stories can hide costs, overlooked workers, excluded groups, and polluted neighborhoods. Myths simplify, systems complicate. Understanding history means holding both at once. The Industrial Revolution also transformed farming. Better tools, mechanization, and rail shipping changed what farms could produce. Farming became more market-driven and less isolated. This completed the loop. Industry reshaped agriculture, which then fed industry more efficiently. The old world didn't disappear, it upgraded. Systems rarely replace, they hybridize. America's industrial revolution followed feedback loops. New energy and machines increased output. Output attracted capital. Capital built networks. Networks expanded markets. Markets demanded more output. Along the way, labor pressure and reform acted as counterforces that prevented total collapse. This is how modern societies evolve: acceleration plus correction. The machine and the rulebook grow together. By 1900 and beyond, the United States had the foundations of modern life: large-scale production, national markets, fast communication, and complex institutions. These foundations brought prosperity for many and hardship for others. They also created the tools to keep improving: laws, education, and organization. History's lesson isn't industry good or industry bad. It's that systems must be designed, not just allowed to run. If you want more big transformations that reshaped everyday life, stay with Tiny Titans History. Subscribe, and we'll keep exploring the turning points that built the modern world, one system at a time.